Opponents of the EPA loosening glider kit rules get a quick stay from a DC court. How community colleges are combating the driver squeeze. Amazon's Prime Day, Christmas in July to test the supply chain. And CSX announces a record 58.6% operating ratio and says the turnaround isn't finished yet. I'm JP.
And I'm Chad.
And we discuss all these issues and more on this week's episode of What the Truck. What you got there, Chad?
Well, we already know what you got there, JP. So, should we even bother saying?
Bell's Too Hard.
Okay.
From Comstock, Michigan.
But you'd think that they were sponsoring us after all the love you're showing them. I'm having, a growler that I got from Riverside Beverage Company here in Chattanooga.
And I understand it's an Orpheus Transmigration, which if you're not familiar with Greek mythology, that might not mean a whole lot to you.
No.
But tell us about the beer, Chad.
Yeah, it's apparently it's I like this. It's an irresponsibly hopped double IPA, and it's bursting with life from an absurd amount of aromatic hops. And I am experiencing a bouquet of kind of some orangey, lemony, tropical fruity with a clean malt body kind of stuff. Super fresh, There's just, I don't know. I'm really digging it. I won't tell you about all the composition, but one of the most dangerous things about it, it's a 10 ABV.
Careful.
Okay. But since we just started on it, it's just going to be a great, exciting ride today with all kinds of fantastic headlines of the week coming at you live. So the first one about the EPA, well, this was an interesting story that came out. We've been covering the EPA the situation before we get right to the headline. Do you want to give us a brief bit of background on Scott Pruitt and company?
Yes. So glider kits, as truckers know, are sort of, old wine in new bottles in a way. Ooh. Right? It's when you use a early model engine in a new body of a truck. It's a cheap way to sort of refurbish a lot of parts that are still in perfect working condition. Unfortunately, most of those trucks don't meet modern strict emission standards.
I think also that once upon a time, maybe back 10 years ago or so, these glider kits were more like important to the industry. They were using them to help during the Great Recession and at other times. So Fitzgerald glider kits and company were seen as more of kind of beloved in the industry.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But of late, it's come to be known through more increased testing that they are super mega polluters.
That and I think with the initial appointment of Scott Pruitt as the EPA administrator, remember he's the former Oklahoma Attorney General who sued the EPA a number of times, sort of wanted to dismantle it by his own account. I think with the appointment of Pruitt, Fitzgerald saw kind of an opening for some...
They did indeed.
And they... got some sort of lobbying and some political muscle through Marsha Blackburn. Is that right?
Yes.
A Tennessee representative, because Fitzgerald Gliders is, I guess they have two locations or just one location?
They have their main one that I know about
in Crossville.
Yes,
Crossville, Tennessee,
next to Tennessee Tech.
Right. And so they were able to, sponsor this sort of deficient and intellectually dishonest study that tried to say that glider kits were actually cleaner than modern engines, which obviously flouts logic. In any case, they were able to sort of, and that study, by the way, was at Tennessee Tech's campus, and then it became a huge scandal and faculty and students and administration were all at each other's throats, and that's a whole another can of worms. Suffice to say that the EPA took this study and ran with it and did just what you'd expect. They said that all glider kits would be sort of exempt from modern day emission standards, and they, if I understand correctly, they drastically raised the limits on how many can be manufactured.
Right, or it would the cap that actually went into effect at the beginning of this year, but the EPA has just chosen not to enforce it, was to decrease manufacturing to just simply 300 trucks per year, and so
which would have obviously killed Fitzgerald gliders,
right?
So, and a few senators got involved, questioning the sort of the corruption of science by the EPA and things like that. And as we also know, Pruitt ended up being forced to resign by President Trump after embarrassing the administration with a number of scandals. But as kind of a last hurrah, they try to pull the plug on these emissions rules. But now it seems like the Sierra Club has been able to get a week-long stay from a court. So
I think it's 10 days, but yeah, it is
okay.
So the story today is that the court ruled that they can have a very brief amount of time, 10 days, because it was an emergency request, and it's simply to give the court sufficient opportunity to consider the emergency motion. It has no bearing on the merits of the case. That was what the ruling was.
Right. It's just basically just like, okay, we'll give you a stay. The EPA has 10 days to respond and come back, and then we'll figure this thing out.
They have till the EPA has until the 25th of this month to respond.
Right.
So that's
kind
the
of a
update.
That's kind of a blip. I think it'll be really interesting to see what the EPA's response is, how consistent it is with what they were doing under Pruitt. I don't think we have much reason to believe that the deputy administrator, Wheeler, will be any different. But who knows? He's also been... I think he has a reputation for sort of avoiding the limelight and some of the controversies that his predecessor found himself embroiled in. So
I've heard him described as more canny or more sophisticated and canny than Scott Pruitt. Whatever that will end up meaning for this particular story, well, stay tuned. We're going to follow this one closely.
Yeah.
Also, one of the things that we're always doing here on What the Truck is following, during this year of the capacity crunch and, freight constraint, we are following, driver retention issues, often called the driver squeeze. Simply, you could just call it more broadly, the driver problem. And one of the things that we reported on this week, Mariah Baker covered how community colleges are combating the driver squeeze. Recently, one of the things you and I talked about was like how difficult it is for a driver to, if the economy's good and say you don't quite have a college education yet, or you just simply don't have one, and you want to go get employed, you can hop right into a construction job with little to no training. But if you wanted to be a trucker, you have to get a CDL. There's a lot of training behind it. It's considered kind of a significant career decision.
Yeah.
There's
several barriers to entry, a lot of various kinds of testing, training, driving, you're a trainee for a while, things like that.
So what some community colleges are finding is that there's an opportunity here to onboard students through a number of different classes, and some, like one of the ones that were covered, some are as fast as 4 weeks. How does 4 weeks sound to you?
That sounds quite truncated.
Truncated.
I would say.
Yeah, it says the article says that these programs, the ones that are as short as 4 weeks, rely heavily on intense training and cutting-edge technology to make the most out of the limited time in the classroom and on the road. But others are, like the one at Chattanooga State Community College. They offer a 7-week commercial truck driving program. There's one in Ohio. It's the Northwest State Community College and Keller Logistics Groups. They've partnered together, and I think it's a little longer than the 7 weeks, but it's also relatively short. There's one also in Central New Mexico Community College, which is at the intersection of I-25 and I-40, which is kind of right in the heart of Albuquerque, which is kind of it's a highly traveled truck route. It makes it an ideal spot for training, but it's a 12 to 15 week course, like a semester,
Yeah.
But what they did, and as Mariah covered, they created an accelerated course, and it just filled up without any marketing. And all of these courses apparently also guarantee 100% job fulfillment after you complete the course. That's pretty exciting.
That doesn't surprise me. And so this is sort of an alternative. So higher education is getting in the game of training drivers, not just leaving it up to the commercial driving schools that are often can be quite expensive.
Apparently so, and
makes sense. What they they do other kinds of vocational training for different trades, things like that.
The U.S. Department of Transportation, anticipates, and as we've covered in our sonar data, about a 6% increase. If it stays at a 6% increase in the employment of heavy and tractor trailing drivers, if that continues over the next 8 years, there's only going to be about 108,400 positions between 2016 and 2026. So it's hardly going to keep up with the demand.
No.
I don't know what kind of, every little thing that we're talking about seems like little things to combat a big problem. Will these death by 1,000 cuts actually help the industry in a significant way? Stay tuned.
Well, I also think some of them, there might be a kind of synergy between some of them. So, for example, if we're able to legalize 18 to 21-year-olds to drive across state lines, then what could the community colleges do? I mean, because that's like their target market,
good point.
Kids right out of high school. So it's if a couple of these things hit at the same time, we could really see some new pipelines into the industry being created.
Right. If trucking really is kind of made cool again to this younger generation of drivers. Yeah. If they can see it in a kind of cool techie way, if there's more opportunities, it could make a dent.
Right. Exactly. Cool. So next we have a story that you wrote, right? This is about Amazon's Prime Day.
And so-called Christmas in July, but kind of more like Black Friday.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about it?
Like Amazon Prime Day, that we released this article on the day of Amazon Prime Day, leading up to their 3 p.m. release. I mean, talk about marketing genius. They kind of targeted what's one of the most dull points of the year around which there are no holidays. And they identified this little time that happened this week in July. And, so for the past few years, they've done this Prime Day. Well, we didn't know this at the time of the article, but we know this now, that the Prime Day that happened this week was the biggest Prime Day of all time by far. It destroyed last year's Prime Day.
Yeah, what do you know the numbers?
$3.5 billion in sales, as opposed to 2.4 billion last year. And that is in spite of the much publicized glitch that happened on their site.
We're talking like a 50% increase.
It's pretty gigantic, right? And
Jeez.
yeah, it's amazing. What I was looking for though, because what the aim of our story was to analyze like what's the stress going to be on the supply chain. Are customers and is FedEx and UPS going to help make all the deliveries on time? So far, I haven't come across significant data of any kind saying that it hasn't worked. It's just kind of being postured as a resounding success. But I do want to tell our listeners that I have found out, and I don't know if you know about this, during their peak seasons in the past, Amazon, for Prime members, that they expect to get the 2-day shipping.
Yeah.
Like in November and December of last year, it was studied that as many as 10% of those packages do not arrive on time.
Yeah.
And doing a tiny bit more. Well, usually it's higher than that. I mean, or low. Usually their success rate is higher than that. It's in the high 90s.
Yeah, I don't think UPS was ready for
Last year.
last year at Christmas. I don't think
No, they
FedEx wasn't. But both companies said in subsequent earnings calls that they really underestimated e-commerce parcel volumes.
Prime Day so far, though, has been by far the biggest day of this year. So, like, it's been the biggest online sales day of this year. And so
It's
it will
super
be curious.
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm really fascinated by the timing of Prime Day because
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard these conversations in the office, but I've been talking with Zach Strickland about some of the data we were seeing coming into the ports. It looked like spot rates were kind of softening a little bit after the July 4th holiday, and he was saying that this is a traditional. There is this weird week-long to 2-week-long period in July that's traditionally much softer before things pick back up in August, September, and then get into peak season. So I wonder if Amazon deliberately positioned Prime Day right in the middle. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, we know that this is sort of like the middle of the year. It's well before Christmas. Won't have anything to do with that. But it's if we slide it in right in this little cooling off period, maybe our transport costs we can get a deal on transportation and logistics costs. It'll be a little bit easier to find some capacity, and we can move things and just.
Now that part about it, I think, is interesting, because one thing that we do know about costs of fuel costs have risen 30% over this year so far. So certainly those shipping costs, if they're shipping it for free, that bit into their bottom line, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But you're right. Strategically speaking, if there was kind of an
they're looking for the little dead zones.
Yeah.
Boom, right there.
So smart, so strategic. You got to hand it to them.
Yeah, they really know their data.
What I was going to say, though, for our listeners is that if you are wondering if you've had a late package delivered to you, you do have redress, as they say.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what that is?
I know.
Have you heard of that? Because you and I have talked about it, and I didn't know if you knew. Because we've received packages late.
I mean, I know that redress means compensation, but I don't know.
You can see specifically. They say that you can, if you tell the company about it by either calling or hitting them online by email, they will give you a month free Prime membership. Okay, so that's step one. They also, if it happens multiple times, they give you percentages off. Certain items, and they will help you to an extent. Now, I think if you're like a repeat offender, but really you're a repeat victim. If you repeatedly get late packages, they say there's limits to,
what they can do for you.
Right.
Well, I know that they study their network. They have really close relationships with people, everyone who does last mile, including the post office, FedEx, UPS. They, for example, if you get a package stolen, you contact them, they'll issue security alerts for that route.
Yeah, that's getting better. Yeah, that's so it's a sophisticated supply chain that the timing of which it might have worked out for Amazon and Prime.
3.4 billion in one day.
3.5.
3.5
is
in
the
one
estimate.
day.
Yes.
Wow.
Not bad. And for our final headline of the week, you're going to tell us about railroads, basically. Specifically, you're going to focus on the CSX.
Well, right. So
earnings report.
we're kind of in the middle of earnings season for hearing about different companies' second quarter results. I know that our executive editor John Kingston just wrote about Union Pacific and Canadian Pacific, and now
and they're doing well, right? Their earnings reports
they're doing well. I think the OR was a little disappointing, but anyway, I listened to the CSX earnings call with the CEO Jim Foote, who was sort of a protege of the late Hunter Harrison, who, as you recall, passed away in December, sort of midway through.
And boy, could he run a tight ship, so to speak.
Yes, that's what he was known for.
Yeah. I am aware of him. And so what did Foote say? Are they exceeding expectations?
Oh, yeah. So about 3 months ago, CSX sort of had this. They said, by the year 2020, we will have an annual operating ratio of 60%. And so, operating ratio, that means how much of your top line revenue does it take to just run your business as is. Okay. So excluding capital expenditures, things like that. And so, the lower the better.
Sure.
Right. And so they had this goal for 60% by 2020. And they
almost have achieved that.
Well, no, they got below. They already hit 58%. For the 58.6% OR for the quarter.
I see.
Crazy numbers. The analysts were just like saying things like wonderful, very impressive, great job. And it's been interesting. And so they've really...
And they said that there's even more good things to come.
There's more good things to come. And some analysts that I talked to, not really necessarily on the call, but afterwards, and some discussions I've had with some rail people, Jim Blaze and some other people, have some questions about how prepared CSX actually is to make some further improvements. We'll get to that in a moment. But basically what they have done is they've carried out Hunter Harrison's precision scheduled railroading philosophy, which basically means instead of having a hub and spoke model with all these hump yards that take trains apart and put them back together, it's more point to point. It's more like what Southwest Airlines did when they first started off, instead of having these hubs and these inefficient things. And so they closed down the majority of their hump yards. They're holding their shippers to much, much tighter schedules.
And they're carrying longer trains as well, right?
They're building longer trains. Average velocity is going up. Dwell times are going down. And average car miles per day, the average distance covered by each car is also going up.
If only all of our airlines worked so efficiently.
Yeah, well, so, and so they've cut a lot of costs. They're reducing CapEx. They're not building big facilities, like Union Pacific is. And that's what's really bringing the OR down. And so they've been able to, almost double their payouts to shareholders, whether it's in the form of dividends or stock buybacks.
Whoa.
So the investors love this stuff.
Yeah.
Their customers, I'm not so sure. And it was kind of interesting. There was a little bit of tension on the call because one of the...
But I thought customer relationships had improved.
I mean, that's what the CEO says. Because when they first started implementing this, I mean, it's precision scheduled railroading. One way to think about it is just instead of customer service, the customer serves you. Like you tell the customer, our train's going to get here at this time and it's going to leave at this time.
Yeah.
If you don't load the car, it's moving.
I could almost see like trucking carriers dictating the terms to their shipping customers and saying that, oh, look how things have, look how our relationships have improved with all this efficiency.
Strickland said the exact same thing, but the problem is that, if you don't like the way that if you're Walmart and you don't like the way a certain truckload carrier is treating you, there's always another one or another one, another
right.
one. But if you have a a grain elevator and you load trains with your grain elevator, there's probably only one railroad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You don't have a lot of choice.
And it's either going to be CSX or it's going to be Norfolk Southern. And so
get on the train or
and so they have way more power over their customers than the typical trucking company.
Well, it's fascinating. We cover all the different kinds of freight.
Yeah,
on what the truck.
The interesting thing that they said. So an analyst from Deutsche Bank asked Foote, where in the business have you not already implemented PSR, precision scheduled railroad?
Okay.
Like, where can we get further efficiencies, further savings?
Where can we squeeze these out? Yeah.
And Foote basically said intermodal.
Ooh.
He was like, we don't know what's going on with intermodal.
I can see that.
For years, and he said he called it dysfunctional.
Whoa.
He said for years and years it was operated as a separate franchise from CSX's core rail business, and it was never properly integrated. And he said there's a ton of work to do. They haven't even started figuring it out yet. And he kind of, it was kind of interesting because it was almost like he was a little sensitive to some of the critiques that CSX had received from its customers last summer when they first started doing this PSR. Because he said, we're going to take methodically when we fix intermodal. We're not going to screw up the railroads. We're going to listen to our customers. If it takes us a couple extra quarters, it takes us a couple extra quarters. But we're going to rationalize this part of our business in the right way. That is interesting. And we will follow that. But what, the subtext of that was, because they said, what's it going to look like? And he basically didn't know. And so some of the analysts that I was speaking to off the call were sort of saying, it's really obvious that CSX has no strategy to fix their intermodal business. Everyone else is growing their intermodal at double digits year over year. CSX isn't. Now intermodal is between 40 to 50% of all car loadings for almost all of the Class 1 railroads. Intermodal's half of what they do, and CSX is saying we don't know what's going on with our intermodal.
That is the subtext, and so a great earnings report, but they better get their act together with a complex supply line within intermodal.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks for covering that. Fantastic job. Are you ready to play another rousing round of Big Deal, Little Deal?
Let's do it.
All right. So I'm going to begin asking you, and let's go about now. JD Power ELD mandate contributed to subdued supply in June. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal. I think there are conflicting signals, and we've seen data that suggests that ELDs have actually increased productivity.
Lyft looks to create human autonomous hybrid network in ride-sharing space. Big deal or little deal?
It's a big deal. This is the ultimate, destiny of these ride-sharing companies, autonomous cars.
Los Angeles turndowns found a bottom. Big deal or little deal?
It's a big deal. I think in a few, we've started to see turndowns out of LA spike, and in a few weeks we'll know how strong the fall season is going to be.
Ground breaks on the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Big deal or little deal?
This is a huge deal. Right now, the main border crossing between the U.S. and Canada is controlled by a family, and it's a toll bridge, and it's an insane monopoly. Huge deal. Solving the parking crisis in the cities of the future. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal, because it ain't like there's some big solution yet. The study showed how parking is very underutilized in cities. Good data, interesting future.
FedEx Institute partners with Good Shepherd Pharmacy to build a blockchain. Big deal or little deal?
Not a big deal in terms of the blockchain, but a big deal in terms of one of the most valuable resources universities can provide to the innovation ecosystem is a space to explore new ideas and opportunities.
Strong consumer spending boosts retail sales in June. Big deal or little deal?
Big deal. Overall, an impressive second quarter for retail spending, but it looks like the tax cuts and healthy jobs are keeping the retail environment strong for now. This helps trucking by forcing inventory replenishment for retailers.
Freight matching cargo chief announces a new data partnership. Big deal or little deal?
Big deal. The key is that Gatehouse and Cargo Chief are taking the forced ELD mandate and making this a positive for carriers, as now this data can lead to receiving AI-matched load offers. And that'll do it for the big stories this week. As always, we go into more detail about each of the topics we've talked about today on our website, FreightWaves.com. We will continue to publish this podcast weekly, so be sure to subscribe to What the Truck on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Also, make sure to leave us a review to let us know what you think of our new podcast.
And if you're interested in freight economics and finance, come to our Market Waves conference at the Gaylord Texan Resort and Convention Center in Grapevine, Texas this November. Visit marketwaves18.com to learn more about this event.
That'll do it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week on What the Truck.